We're only days away from Colorado's primary election, where Colorado Republicans will select who faces Michael Bennet, and Denver Democrats will select who faces independent candidate Helen Morgan for district attorney. Darrell Glenn secured an endorsement from Senator Ted Cruz this week, and Robert Blaha and Jack Graham continue to hit the TV airwaves with ads. Patty, it's been a pretty sleepy primary season, but now that we're to decision day and all the mail-in ballots coming in, who do you think is going to win in both these big races?
Well, we all know how good I am at predicting these. I think the winners will be the people who remember to get out and vote. And remember, if you're unaffiliated, you can go and affiliate to vote for one of those. It's too late to do it by mail. You'd have to go to a voting center. And if you're not registered yet at all, you can go register on the day of the primary. So we could really up the ante on the number of people who are voting. I've been trying to figure out how many people switched parties, maybe to do a little sneaky subterranean action on this, but I don't have those numbers yet. It's about the same number of Republicans and Democrats who voted so far. The Republican group has been crazy. I mean, when you had Glenn taking off after Kaiser about his military record and then saying, I really didn't have any evidence, but at least people talked about it, that was the biggest misstep he's made so far. Kaiser, of course, has made his own missteps. And for all their ads, which I am hearing or seeing pretty endlessly, I don't see Blaha or Graham really getting traction. But with 5 candidates, it's not going to take much to split it. It could be just one candidate supporters really getting out, being loyal, and pushing them over.
David, as of taping, the Secretary of State's office reports a little over 20% turnout among Republicans. So far pretty low. You never know how that's going to change the next few days. But from what we've seen so far from the election season, from the proposed turnout, and how this season has been nationally, who has the edge in this 5-person race?
My guess might be Jack Graham. He's one of the two that's really had, along with Blah, put a lot of money into the race for TV, and on something that gets so little coverage, partly to the constriction and near extinction of print media in Colorado. I think that might help a lot, and nobody has really much name recognition. The best thing for the Republicans is that this primary is going to be over in June, which gives whatever unknown candidate wins a chance to get going and start fundraising. It's a big difference from the olden days, say in the 70s, when the primary might be in early September. And so the Republicans would be continuing on this now and not able to start raising the national money to try to take on Bennet, who is the most vulnerable Democratic incumbent in the Senate and could be beaten with a good candidate and a good campaign.
Eric, of the 5 Republicans running the primary, which campaign manager gets the best night's sleep on June 27th?
Oh, probably none of them get a good night's sleep. I've never met a campaign manager who sleeps very well on the night before the election. That's a trick question, Dominic. I'm not going to jump at that one. I echo Patty in the sense that this thing has been very low intensity, low profile, low excitement level. I think a lot of that goes to the presidential race. Trump and all of the wackiness around that whole thing, which continues now, has just taken all of the air out of the balloon. There's just no oxygen left for any of these candidates. And there's not really a top-tier candidate on paper among them. As I've said before, I would anticipate that the winner of this 5-way primary will have maybe 30% of the vote and maybe under 30% of the vote, because they're all going to get a slice of the pie. There's not a token candidate among them. They're all going to get a slice of the pie. I happen to think maybe the more interesting race or the more consequential race over the long term is not that primary where the winner wakes up the next morning facing a fairly substantial, well-funded, entrenched incumbent in Michael Bennet. I think the more interesting one might be the Denver DA's race, where yes, there is an independent candidate waiting in November, but having the Democratic nomination in highly Democratic Denver is a place you want to be. I have no idea how to call that one. Three candidates, all with some claim on it. No idea how to call it. Lastly, I'll make a prediction here, not about this primary, but that come November, the really interesting races in this state are not the presidential race in terms of how close it's going to be, and not the Bennet versus whomever race, but the really interesting races are the 6th congressional district between Morgan Carroll and Mike Kaufman, and a slew of ballot issues, unlike a list that this state has ever seen in terms of the number and the amount of money that's going to be spent total on all of them. That's where the focus is going to be in terms of a late election night come November.
So Susan, take your pick. We have an interesting DA's race. We have an interesting Republican primary. When we're talking about this on June 29th, how do you think it all shakes out?
I think in terms of the Senate race, someone wrote today that the winner of the GOP primary is Michael Bennet. And I think that's true. I think, Michael has $6 million in the bank, and as Eric said, and others have as well, none of these candidates really stand out. None of them are really top-tier candidates. They're not a Cory Gardner. So I don't think he has much to worry about. I think it will be basically a snoozer race, although there's this factor about what happened in 2014 with Mark Udall, that there's this anti-incumbent sentiment in Colorado, and I think if anything, Bennet has to worry about that more than any of these people in particular. I think, as Eric said, the big race really next Tuesday is the DA's race. I would pick, in terms of who I think will win, not in terms of who I would vote for, by the way, is Michael Kerrigan, who has really been able to garner a ton of support from communities of color and various special interest groups. I think has really distinguished himself as by far the most talented retail politician of all of them. But I would remind voters about him that before Black Lives Matter happened, before Ferguson happened, before there was a verdict in the Marvin Booker case, Michael Kerrigan, who's very much talking like a progressive now, really sounded like Mitch Morrissey 2.0. And so I think there's been a massive transformation in his messaging there. And I think the race against Helen Morgan, independent, come November will be fairly interesting.